Okay, I'm not going to wait the Fayetteville 5. I'm just going to go ahead and start. I'm sure some people will drift in. And sorry, I have coworkers in the audience. I'm going to say stuff you've already heard about. Just let it go. I did want to let everybody know on October 6th, in this very room, we are going to be showing an excerpt of the Ken Burns film, The U.S. and the Holocaust, and we're having a panel discussion. That is in conjunction with Arkansas PBS. They kind of brought that to us. So that's October 6th. There's more programming along the same lines in the future. I won't go through all that right now, just check our calendar. Tonight, we have Dr. Trisha Starks from the University of Arkansas. She has been a professor of history at the U of A since 2000, after graduating with a PhD in history from The Ohio State University. She's the author of the monographs The Body Soviet and Smoking Under the Czars, which is a great title. I love that title. She's co-editor of several collections, most recently From Fish Guts to Fabergé, The Life Cycle of Russian Things, which is another great title. Love with that.
We were up for the worst title of the
year. Really?
A diagram prize.
No. That's it's like the golden raspberry.
Yes. Is Superman circumcised one?
No, that's a good one.
That's also a good title.
She has earned grants from the National Institutes of Health as well as the Kennan Institute for Advanced Russian Studies. Sometime tonight, even though it's not on the program, would you talk briefly about your papers about smoking in the Soviet Union? Because I think that would be fascinating. She's an award-winning teacher who offers courses in the history of medicine and Russian and Soviet history. In addition to her research and teaching at the U of A, she also serves as the university's director of the Humanities Center. And I also wanted to tell you I have those little evaluation slips on a table in the back. Before you leave, please fill one of those out and leave it in the box. That's all I have to say. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Starks.
Looking at our numbers, I'm going to kind of sit, and hopefully we can also, your chairs are movable, so we can kind of talk more than me just talking. Oh, so I will grab this. So I have, it's been a while, but I have used this book repeatedly since it came out in the 1990s. And I was shocked, I think, as anyone, to see the movement to ban it that started, I believe, in Tennessee earlier this year, and was the idea was that it should be banned for rough, objectionable language and for cartoon drawings of nude women. I don't know. I was trying to find both of those things in there, and I must be more sailor than most because I could not find rough or objectionable language. And the idea of the nudity of the bodies that were being tortured is also problematic in other ways as well. But what I'd like to do is first just kind of ask, have you worked with a graphic novel before? Is this the first time that you have read a graphic novel? Okay, I've seen a few yes, a few no. If it's your first time with a graphic novel, how did you feel about it? Did you enjoy this presentation? What did you feel were some of the advantages of this as a work of, well, we'll talk about what kind of work it is next. What were some of the advantages of this as a graphic presentation? Somebody want to?
I think that it's,
I think everybody carries really well. We'll see. We're gonna put baby right here. All right.
well, okay, so the depiction of Jewish people as mice, I think that visual reminder on every single page, I think is powerful and cumulative. And then I can't remember, are the Nazis, are they pigs?
They are cats.
Cats, okay.
The Poles, we are the pigs.
That makes so much sense, you know, the cats pounce on and kill the mice. I have to say that that I have worked with a lot of and read a lot of graphic novels, and I like them a lot. I've read this more than once, and oddly enough, the last time that I read it, a thought came to me. I did not wish this thought to come to me, but it did, so I'm sharing it. And that is, I thought in some ways, this makes the horror of it a little softened when being like it, because it is like a comic book.
And did anybody else, that is one of the criticisms that has been used against, when this won the Pulitzer in 1992 for the second half, one of the criticisms was that it softened the Holocaust. And that's indeed one of the things that Spiegelman came out and talked against, that he spoke about how, when there was this attempt to, they did ban, they did take it out of the 8th grade curriculum there in Tennessee. When they did this, he said it was an attempt to soften the story of the Holocaust. And yet there is this critique that by using these anthropomorphized forms, he is doing so. What are the advantages of it? What are the detractions? Let's talk about the advantages first. What are the ways that using the mice and the cats as forms actually allow this to work? Yeah.
I think the value in it is that children who are appropriately educated, intelligent, have intelligence, and younger adults, it does lighten the spirit of that period. And I think that helps the children, anybody, it helps them to not take it as a heavy subject. I don't know how to define myself. I'm kind of a realist, so I read MAGA books and anime, and enjoy them for the humor, for the imagination and the fantasy. Because I call myself a realist. I know that there was a Holocaust. I know that there was a Nazi period of horror and war and all that stuff, so I can kind of balance the two. So I just enjoy the genre.
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
And I think it's true that it is, for students, for youth, it is something that allows them entree into this without perhaps the full horror of something like Night and Fog. When I was in 7th grade, that's what we watched, which was the set of videos that were taken immediately upon the liberation of the camps. And it was depictions of the bodies stacked and all of these things. And there was a horror there that at a certain point became overwhelming and also desensitizing. And so there's that worry of becoming too horrific so as to even be able to approach. At the same time, there are images in here that are hard to look at, even as they are mice. Are any of those, I see some nods, anything come to mind in particular?
Oh, what got me when I was a kid was the page of Spiegelman at his desk with the mouse mask on, and there's just a pile of bodies.
Yeah.
That made an impression on me.
Yeah. The pile of bodies, other images?
Well, the nude men, I did find nude men. I've seen them shocking, to a certain extent.
Yes.
I remember when I had to read it, part 2, I think it's part 2, the Hell Planet segment. Where
It's in part 1, but
oh,
yeah.
part 1, okay, sorry. But like that's the part where like it breaks from like the mice and has like a more like, it's still cartoon, but it's humans and stuff. And that was kind of, I guess, trying because the art style was so different, I guess.
Yeah, so page 102, which has a more Crumb-like, if you know of other graphic artists, that it has a much more disturbing, kind of agitated style to it, which is somewhat missing. I hear the depictions of nudity and especially emaciation are shocking. Something that I've had students pick up in the past is that entire passage about the children and having them swung against the wall to bash their heads in when they were, and the depictions of the hangings and the immolation, the burning of the bodies. That these all are highly disturbing, and yet that somewhat anthropomorphized head, because these are still human bodies, there's still that torturous feel to it, that just that movement of the heads gives a bit of a blandness to it that allows you to continue reading. Because I work with I am not a historian of the Holocaust, I'm a historian of medical eugenics. And so these are of a piece with a lot of other imagery that I have encountered, and that makes it a little bit more accessible. Because other things that we read about eugenics are, I have to put down and walk away for a while, whereas I can sit with this and read through it rather easily. So the use of the animal heads does have this kind of, measuring of the Holocaust, yet at the same time the horrors are within. One of the other criticisms that has been put out about this is the way that it depicts race. When you have these depictions of mice and cats as distinct racial types, it gives the concept that race is something that is legible, that it is easily discernible, that you walk out and you can know a Jew, you can know a German, you can know a Pole, and that these are easily discerned things in real life. Do you feel like that is a correct critique of this? Does he do anything to complicate race so that it doesn't seem like it's a natural? There's nothing more natural than cats chasing mice. To give this idea that this is a natural order is to play into the exact same tropes of racial hygiene and racial anti-Semitism that emerged in the 19th century. But do you consider this a racist book?
The whole thing about the mice and the cats, it's also a kind of method, because you see scenes where the main character is pretending to be a Pole or German. So he puts in the comic, he puts a mask on. Mm-hmm. And so that symbolizes trying to be something you're not. And he gets away with it in the comic because, the other characters act like he is the mask. Mm-hmm. And so this doesn't really seem like he's making racial distinctions. It's more like identity and what you put out there. And so you can just put on another mask and be something else. At least in the comic.
So the masks give that idea, though there are points where the masks are also blended issues. How else does he complicate this scene so that it's not just every person who is Jewish looks exactly like a Jewish person? Because again, it's the Nazis brought in physical anthropologists in the 1930s to try and identify Jewish types according to skull, according to, these are techniques that came out of the 19th century, that skulls could create an idea of where humans were on the great chain of being. The distance of the eyes, the shape of the nose, but particularly the angle of the jaw. There's a scientist by the name of Peter Camper in the 19th century that said the 100-degree angle is the perfect angle of the jaw, and that all other angles are a degradation of that, moving onward. And in his racism, put African Americans at the bottom, or Africans at the bottom of that. So, yeah.
I was just going to say that I think it's more of like a national reflection on nationalism or cultural identity. Because like when and correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a few years since I read it, but when the GIs show up, the Americans, isn't there a black dog and a white dog? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And so the dogs of the Americans, and they do have some, and there are some other mixtures here. So we have, of course, the use of the masks. If you look on page 138, there are ways that he complicates those usages, even in the first volume. But in the first volume, she has a mask, but is also her visible tail behind. And so he tries to give these ideas of how there might be a surface or a cultural or a bodily matter, a bodily form of how you walk, how you behave that might give away your ethnicity, yet at the same time you can mask and you can become part of that. He masks there. He also after the criticism of the first volume in this regard, works to have a slightly different, there they are. We look at page 291. He has a family of mixed, not just the black and white dogs, but he has a family of German cats with children who are mice and cats at the same time in this post-war reality. They're tiny little things that you can find in this book. If you read it for 20 different years, you start to find a lot of things in it. And so we have these kind of mixtures. We also have the later discussion that he begins book 2 with that has not just that horrific visual of the pile of bodies, but also his back and forth with reporters and others.
On page 42.
And
What's his mommy?
yeah, or 201 if you have the 2 volume. I don't know what it
Oh,
is.
I have 2 separate volumes.
Yeah, if you
so-
have 2 separate volumes, I can't help you.
Okay.
In these, we have not a mouse with a cat face on, but we have human faces with different masks of different ethnicities on them. What do you think he's meaning by that? How is he trying to address his critics? What is the meaning of the human with the...
It kind of goes back to, wasn't it Du Bois who wrote We Wear the Mask? Or Dunbar? Whoever it was wrote We Wear the Mask, for blacks. I mean, we all wear masks, right?
But he doesn't do that throughout that second volume. It's only here. What is the reasoning for this? When he goes back to his discussion between himself and his father and recounting his father's tales, okay, not those kind of tales, stories, he goes back to this idea of him as actually a mouse, not a masked mouse. What is going on here?
I think maybe he's trying to emphasize that when things go past a certain point, that whatever the mask might have been, it becomes internalized.
Perhaps. I wonder if it's, it is a psychological break, much like Prisoner of the Hell Planet gives us that psychological break where he is telling more his own story rather than recounting his father's story and his interactions with his father. This is after his father's death. This is more perhaps a psychological point where he sees himself more as a person. Perhaps he's envisioning a glorious post-racial future where we are able to just put on our ethnicities and take them off when necessary, that we are not typed by others. But it also has a very puzzling set of images as he goes to see his father, or he starts to think more and more of his father and goes to see his therapist, where he goes backward in time and becomes smaller and smaller. Anyone have any theories on what that is about? Do you remember this portion? It's like the trippiest portion of the book. It really is an odd set of images. Let's see. He becomes smaller and smaller talking to his therapist. His therapist, by the way, a survivor as well, is in human form with a mouse mask. So his relationship to his therapist is very different than that to his father. Why might he be doing this? Kelly?
There was, since I work here, I'm like, I can't say all the.
Oh, come on in.
I did see one little snippet of an interview with him where he was talking about trying to decide how much of his own, how much of himself to put in the book. I mean, like his own point of view, or, is he just seeing through his father's eyes, or is he telling his own story? I don't know. I'm sure it's related to that somehow, but.
I think you're right. I think that this is where he steps out and he's speaking directly from his experience. and is trying to depict his own psychological progress. I mean, he's obviously been through a great deal of therapy, and had his mental breakdown and has gone through, and so he understands in a more intellectualized way than many the experience he's gone through. That actually brings up the next question I want to discuss before we get back to talking about animals again. Let's stop and talk about, what is this book? Is it a history? Is it a biography? Is it an autobiography? Is it just a primal scream yell? What is this?
Well, I learned a lot, so I mean, I feel like that, as far as I can tell, nothing I've learned otherwise at other places in other ways contradicts what I've learned in here. So
Okay.
I think it's pretty good history.
Okay, it is pretty good history. The dates are good, the numbers are good. The excellent drawings of hiding places and or crematoriums. Is it a biography? Is it just a story of his father?
Changes like over time, because like it was also serialized, wasn't it? Like it took a long time for him to complete this project, and so I feel like, and I think that's where like book 2 kind of like brings in him thinking about how the earlier parts have been received also. So like maybe it changed partway through, like some chapters are more one thing than the other, but then like added, since it wasn't maybe just conceived initially, but like it commented on itself, so it's kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know, more like a spiral.
I guess we can go in, I like that idea that it changes over time. We can also go into whose story is being told. Obviously not Mala's, since we, or Anya's, we don't get hers, and we don't get Mala's. Women just don't get as much voice usually.
It's basically a biography with a memoir framework, I think.
Ooh, I like that. And so it's both a tale of his father and his tale as well. One of the literary theorists who has read this book and talked about this book has noted the ways in which that back and forth in time works much like the use of the animal or anthropomorphized people as a way to distance from some of the true horrors and also interweave our tale with the experience of coming from this, of moving forward. Now, if we make it a story of his father, or we make it a story of him, one of the things that has been thrown at him, and had thrown at many people who write of the Holocaust, is this idea of profiting. That it's an exploitation of the stories of others for his own profit and glory. That it is an exploitation of his father's story, and that's one of the things he mentions in that psychological passage, is that he feels guilt for the way he depicts his father and what that does. Do you feel that that is a just charge upon him? What do you feel? What do you think is the way? Does he triumph over that kind of charge? Because of course he does profit from this. He becomes a massive presence in graphic novels. This is seen as the first major masterpiece of graphic novels.
I think it was necessary, and I think this is what he thought as well, to make this book. First of all, it is his story ultimately to tell, because his father, by dying, is now he is in possession of that story to tell. So he's telling his story, his relationship to his father, and he's telling the story of his father's experience. So really, that he has a claim to the story, but ultimately, I think as one of the bastions of comics is literature, I think he knew that he had to tell this tale to prove that, so American audiences will understand what European audiences had understood for decades, that comics can be literature.
Other thoughts? Yeah.
I haven't really thought that deeply about the book or the author, but I think all creators deserve to yield profits, to gain profits, and it's his story. I like what you pointed it out. It's his dad's story and it's his story. How else are we gonna know?
Yeah, I mean, that is our ultimate Holocaust commentary, right? Is always never forget. And how do we how do we do that without having memories created? How do we do that without having documentation? And so, and it does not seem, I do not know of a lot of merch associated with mouse. So that idea of profiteering is perhaps a bit overblown.
He made a tote bag and a T-shirt for the Strand bookstore as a fundraiser thing for them. That's about it.
Yeah, I think a fundraiser for a bookstore is unacceptable. I don't think he's making a lot of money from that, nor, as we know, all of our bookstores could use all the help they can get. I feel like that's another just cause that he is working for there. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Anyone can profit off of someone else's tragedy.
Yeah.
And that it happens every day, every hour of every day. And this is just a good story,
Mhm.
full stop. And it's a way to relate. It's a way to get this down, not down to, down a level, but it's a way to reach a wider audience
Mhm.
and release this horror of the story. And it's not just, facts.
Yeah.
And it's not a textbook, and it's not an article that's not accessible to everyone. It is accessible to everyone of every age. I would say little young kids, but my daughter is 12, and she's
Mhm.
seen it all. And she didn't read the whole thing word for word, but she asked a lot of questions. And she did ask about the nudity, and she's like, they're in prison. Why is this? I said, well, it's a way. Number one, they all have lice, and then ew, gross. And I said, it's also a way to make people vulnerable.
Mhm.
To take away everything. They're vulnerable.
Yeah.
You can't. You're defenseless.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's it sparks questions. It's just a good way to get the story out. And it's not just it's not trying to shock.
Mhm.
And it's not dry facts. It's it's more relatable.
I love everything that's been said so far, but I'd like to add to that, I think it's an important story to be told. And the part about it for me that resonates the most is how these people are special because his father has his wits about him so many times. He just knows the right thing to do that saves his life. And I think that sometimes in the Holocaust we see the Jewish people as being meek and unable to stand up for themselves in some ways, because they're being driven down, they're being stomped on. And here we see people who are using their wits and every resource they have available to survive.
That brings up an important point that he kind of talks about in that middle passage at the beginning of volume 2, but it's also something we think about a lot with all sorts of Holocaust literature. And it is that one of a kind of valorizing of survivors. And a valorizing of survivors as being wittier, as having a better idea of what they're doing, or being more talented, or something along those lines. And some of that is from the tales that he actually tells himself, right? Some of this is from the tales of the father and the way that he depicts his survival. Do you find that he is a reliable narrator? Do you think he's telling the truth of his history?
I do.
Why would he lie?
Well, many survivors have immense guilt for how they survived, for the things that they had to do to survive,
Yeah.
or the fact that they, such as his wife, who took her life. And many survivors take their lives because they can't deal with the guilt of knowing that they survived while other very worthy, very smart, very important people did not. And some of them are driven by the guilt of what they had to do to survive.
Well, in volume 2, I definitely remember there was a panel or two where Mr. Spiegelman's dad just says it's all random, that who survived, who died, it's just all random.
That's actually the therapist that does that.
Uh,
Never does his father say that. His father talks about all the ways that he was smarter than others. All the things that he did that, you know, other relatives did not.
I think that's why I believe him as a narrator, is because he's a bit of a braggart, and if he was lying, he wouldn't throw so much shade at all the people and all the terrible things that they did to survive. So, because if he felt any guilt for doing something inappropriate, he would leave those people alone and just keep his mouth shut. But instead, he talks about his resourcefulness, his cunning, and then talks smack on the cousins and everybody who did horrible things.
That does help. Yeah, you're right, that he's given a certain warts and all presentation that helps in that. How else does Spiegelman create from someone that he obviously doesn't trust, that he has obviously had problems with in terms of presentation? How else does he create from him a reliable narrator that you are like, yeah, I believe this story? What else does he do? How does he balance his father's voice with other things to create a reliable story?
I mean, like, I want to say he kept the receipts, basically. I think Spiegelman's technical drawings in the book with the hideaways, and this, he pieces everything together so perfectly that you know that, oh, this, nobody could make this up. This is concrete, and so I think that level of detail lends an authenticity to it.
The detail is very important there. What else?
And he shows his father's really bad sides too. He's not glorifying his father and making his father seem like some kind of saint or hero.
Where are some of the warts that come out from the father?
His
The demands he
marriage.
makes of
His marriage.
With
That,
love.
oof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. All of us are like, oh, yeah. That, yeah. There is definitely, the tension there is very difficult.
Father's own racism also comes out.
Yeah. His own racism in the relationship with the black dog that we, one of the black dogs that we encounter. He also talks about the problematic way in which his father exemplifies every stereotype of the Jewish people. How he feels like he is making a caricature with his father, and he obviously struggles with that. And so that presentation, and also I'd say of Art himself, that he presents himself with warts and all, that he presents his problematic behaviors in a way that makes it feel authentic. Actually, I'm going to ask you about that. How does Art present himself in a way that makes him seem a reliable narrator?
I'm thinking when he's, his father's on the exercise bike and he's getting the story and he's smoking and he's letting ashes just fall, and doesn't want to go help him,
Yeah.
like a good son Yeah. So he kind of shows his own warts too.
Yeah. And especially knowing that so much of that this is, while the process of creating the history is while his father is alive, the actual presentation of it comes after his father's death. And so you know that he is listening to these things, he is thinking about the way that he behaved with his father, and is very much re-examining his own, much like he does in Prisoner of the Hell Planet in regards to his relationship to his mother. In both, we see a kind of an apologia written after the death of the parent to talk about the problems there. That actually is one of the things that's a unifying theme of this novel, or history, or biography, or autobiography, or memoir, or is shame and guilt. That we see shame and guilt appearing in so many different ways. that guilt is definitely a part of the Holocaust survivor's experience. But we're also seeing it exemplified in Art's experience of his relationship with his father. How does guilt come out from Art? How is his relationship to his father colored by his father's experience as a survivor?
Because ultimately his mother didn't survive at the end of the day. And he has a lot of resentment towards his father for a number of issues, and I think he feels like his father bears responsibility for his mother's suicide, but he also knows that his father bears responsibility for getting rid of her diaries. And that's an unforgiveness. That's, whatever's left of her is gone forever. And
You notice that he calls him a murderer afterwards. That there are multiple ways to kill, and that by taking his memories of his mother, he's basically killed him herself, as well as the way that she killed herself. The fact that she had no note, that kept coming up again and again, and that he kept on mentioning that. It's in The Prisoner in the Hell Planet, it's in the beginning of Volume 2. It's also said by his father several times that we have this as an ongoing issue, and that those memories are gone. We do have, however, memories in terms of photographs. And those photographs are particularly jarring, right? When you encounter these photographs of Rishu, of his mother, of the family members at the end that are kind of a mixture photograph set. Why do you think he includes those photographs? What do they do to the narrative? How do they interact with the animals? When you first saw those photographs, I assumed that you sat there with them for a minute. When you saw the photograph of his brother who died. Let's see, I found a page.
it's very grounding.
I like that, yeah. Grounding. It is, I think it should be, it should be the frontispiece for Volume 2, in the 2-volume 165.
I think it kind of takes you like back to reality in a sense, because you're stuck in this anthropomorphized mouse universe, and then it's like, oh yeah, like these were people. So.
Which is somewhat jarring that you get that feeling, because you're also like, I thought I was being very cognizant that this is a real story, but then all of a sudden there is that moment of, oh wait, it really is a real story. It's not just that somehow that photograph jars you back in. It's a very visceral feeling. It's like a shocking moment when you get those photographs. Much like Prisoner on the Hell Planet is a shocking set of visuals too, because it has that greater realism to it.
I'll say that I recently read The Dressmakers of Auschwitz. And as I read that book, which is filled with photographs of the women and families of the women who became the dressmakers of the Nazi commandants, or whatever their title is, I kept thinking of this, and I kept weighing what I was learning about Auschwitz compared to what I had heard about it here, learned about it here, and it all fit, it all fit together, and in a way, after finishing that book, I had a moment of gratitude for this not being, having a lot of actual pictures in it, because it's very hard, it's very hard to see those faces.
One of the things I often think about this book is that because it has that distance, people finish it, which makes it all the more powerful. That when you don't have that distance, people put things down and can't come back to them. But this, because it has that smallest bit of distance, It allows you to fall away from it.
Well, and I think that when this came out, I think, wasn't there some worry that people were forgetting the Holocaust?
There is always worry that people will forget the Holocaust. But one of the things that also, if those photos were of interest to you, you can follow the Holocaust Museum. I think it's the Auschwitz Museum, actually, will put up every day a photograph that they have from their collections of somebody who was euthanized during the Holocaust, and give their stories. I want to take us back to the animals, because we've been talking a lot about the cats and mice, but there's other depictions in there.
The French are frogs.
The French are frogs, we do have that. I actually like the Swedes are my favorite. I do like us as dogs, but the Swedes as the reindeer just make me very happy. But one of the more problematic presentations, one of the ones that has given him the most flack, is the use of pigs for the poles. Pigs are, how do they fit into this universe? If we're talking cats and mice and dogs, those all make sense. Why pigs? When you think of a pig, what do you think?
Dirty.
Dirty, greedy,
Overbearing.
overbearing, and powerful. Yeah.
Well, I believe I'm correct about this, that when Vladek has to get places, he rides in the trolley with the Germans, not with the Poles, because he knows that the Poles will turn him.
Yeah.
So I think, his experience with them probably colored Art's idea about them.
Do we think it's Art's idea? That's an interesting point. Do we think this is Art's or Vladek's?
I'm saying that the experience that Vladek had with them may have sparked in Art the idea to use that animal for the Poles.
So the Poles, where is their placement in the Nazi hierarchy? How are they treated? They are seen as an Untermensch. They are ones to be labored to death, much like the Slavs more generally. They don't occupy a particularly elevated place. They are not given any kind of sense in the hierarchy of softness. They are subject to very harsh recrimination if they resist. There are instances of Poles hiding Jewish people or others, and entire villages being razed or entire families being taken and destroyed. And so there have been many Poles who talk about their resistance being greater than the French resistance, but not getting the same kind of benefit of treatment. And Spiegelman is definitely giving Poles as a mass this kind of treatment as greedy, corrupt, filthy, mean. Pigs are one of the few animals that'll eat their own. Sorry, I go dark. Sorry. Anyway, so it has all of these really strident and pretty racist connotations to it. Do you think that was problematic? Do you think this is problematic? Or does he somehow come out of that? Does he depict good Poles? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Volume 1. There's I think it's a Bolshevik who helps Vladek and Anya, they're walking, they're trying to they have the pig masks on, they're trying to pass themselves out, and they find a house of someone that she knows, and something like that. But then that's
They have to pay for it though.
yeah. And then they don't stay very long because they get back, and that's when another pig shouts out, "There's a Jew in the garden or in the wall or something."
And the pigs as a whole are not depicted in, these are nasty pigs. I mean, they are They are razorbacks. They are all depicted as vicious looking, rather than, because you can have a curly, cute little pig, but even the children, when the children are yelling, oh, here's a Jew, we have, and which makes sense that they would be depicted as vicious, but that is all we see, is viciousness. And of course, that may be, is this just a reflection of Loddick's experience?
You can't have a cute Gestapo. I mean, that's not gonna work.
Yeah, but we don't get that, I mean, we do have some humanizing of even the cats. Where are some of the cats that are humanized? I guess that makes sense. How are some of the Germans given dimension? I guess that's your, right, is that your definition right there of racism, whether there is dimension or no dimension? And the Poles are unidimensional.
Well, true, yes, but, I mean, I can understand that. I mean, you know, the lady, Quokka's farm, this is in the first volume, page 139. She did give them a place to stay. I mean, she
For
did.
money.
True. But she gave them a place to, I mean, she provided a place that they could stay in if they could continue to pay, which there weren't that many places to stay.
And I will say that she's one of the few, she would be my one Pole that comes out okay, because she warns them about the smugglers. She's the only one that's like, don't do that, I don't trust these people. Which is like one of the few times we have a Pole that does something not out of complete self-interest. By the way, I just push back on you guys just because, you know, this is what discussion is about, right? Is trying to figure out these things. The other one that comes up is the Americans. How did the Americans come up? What kind of dogs are these? Are we smart dogs? Because you look at those dogs, right away, you know what I'm thinking. These are Labradors. What does that say? How does that depiction of the dogs, of the Americans as dogs, how does that feed into an understanding of their placement in the war, their placement in the Holocaust, their placement in this chain? They're not vicious-looking dogs, are they?
It's not in their character.
It's not in their character. I like that.
But their natural enemy is the cat.
Yeah. And again, we keep coming back. That natural does really bother me. Because it does make all of this seem like this is the way. And again, that plays right into the ideas of race. That it is a natural distinction. When 99% of our 99% of our DNA is the same. The markers of skin color and hair color and eye shape are minor little pieces along our chains of DNA. Very small in their distinctions. And yet this is making it very clear and making it feel natural to have this kind of back and forth.
Well, no schools or parents that I've seen are rushing to teach children that race is a social construct.
No.
It's too, they cannot fathom that. They don't want to.
The other thing is, how else do you depict this book?
Yeah, can't.
How else do you get at that idea of what he does with the Anya having the mask and the tail? That Polish people would be like, yes, you are Jewish. Yeah.
But by her wearing the mask and having a tail, was he trying to depict a duality kind of thing? You could be loyal to Germany, or you could be loyal to your kin, your neighborhood, your family.
I think, or that you can be mistaken quickly across those lines. That it's not as easy to find these distinctions, at least in a superficial way. And that's, I guess, do we see this just as a superficial? kind of just the back and forth of the heads. Its own little minor movement back and forth.
It could be a minor, not a flaw, but characterization. But I think it's important to be able to let the readers find some familiarity, especially with the masks.
How do we see a complication further of this question of race with the depiction of Francois, his wife? How is she depicted? She's French.
She's from?
Right.
No? Oh, sorry.
No, but there are frogs in there for the French, but she is not one. How is she depicted?
As a mouse.
As a mouse. Why? How does she make it in as a mouse even though she's French?
I think part of it is like they talk about how she converted, and so that could be part of it. But I also think that, you know, they have that scene where they're talking about how he should depict her and like how he should depict the French. And I feel like since that came after the first edition, maybe he just thought it was natural, like, well, if he's depicted as a mouse, she is too. So.
And then she converts. And so we have this kind of movement across the ideas of race and ethnicity. One of the things that we talk about with the construction of the idea of Jewishness as it is then practiced by the Germans is that there is a transition in the 19th century from the idea of Jewishness being religion that one can convert out of and then become part of the larger society, or that Jewishness was a distinct racial group. And that distinct racial grouping comes out of this physical anthropology tradition of trying to mark the faces and the angles of the bones and the skeletal structure as being a distinctive subtype. It was important to anthropologists of this period, it was important to medical authorities of this period to have that distinctiveness because they were very worried that the Jewish race, as defined in the 19th century, was a degenerate race, one that was going to destroy other races through intermarriage, which is why we have the racial purity laws that the Germans enact, which are based upon racial purity laws from the United States that we enacted in the California first, and then elsewhere in Virginia, and then codified in 27 with the Buck v. Bell decision. And so that worry about degeneracy, that worry about miscegenation or the mixing of races is something that is hidden in the background of these discussions of mice and cats and dogs and others. Are there any questions that occurred to you as you were reading through? Questions you have about the Holocaust, about its movement that you want to hit with me with? Yeah.
You mentioned the United States and where those laws came in,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sorry.
No.
I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. That's okay. There's some lovely books out there about that. One of my favorite is a short book by a woman named Wendy Klein called Building a Better Race, and it looks largely at the eugenics movement in the United States, which was domesticated. It was everywhere, world's fairs, county fairs. You just go and find out about how to breed better people. Yeah.
Okay, I remember now. The Tuskegee experiments and other similar types of research was done on the basis that they were inferior human beings. And my question, just the universal question, is how is it that good people, in whatever decade or century, in our case, I guess, that we're in 20,000s, how did they allow, knowing that there's evil and negativity connected to these movements, how did good people, educated people, just fall in line? Like Germany, here in the United States.
In Germany, one of the more disturbing things that I talk about in my class is that the Holocaust grew out of a program that was started in 1939 for the extermination of disabled people. First sterilization starting in 33, heating up after 35. 70,000 people will be sterilized in Germany by 1940 who were seen as unfit. And unfit could be epilepsy, congenital deformity, homosexuality, or interracial, any kind of interracial birth. Because they truly believed that they were, and this was practiced by doctors with no major, there was no major coercion from the state. These doctors felt that they were doing the best thing for the human race as a whole, because they believed that intermarriage between different races was leading to the degeneration of different groups, and that if that was continued to be practiced, the human race would die out.
Glad they were wrong.
Indeed. But this, so the final solution, the Holocaust emerges from this program that started with sterilization and then moves towards euthanasia in 1939 as doctors and medical authorities worry about a coming war and wanting to make sure there are enough beds for for soldiers that have been wounded who could then be serviced and put into action. And so they start to kill children, people in insane asylums, euthanizing first, and in terms of either carbon monoxide or injection, lethal injection, or starvation, which is a horrific way to go. Not that any of them are great, sorry, but what? I'm sorry. Exposure. And so slowly killing that, and then that program, they basically transfer all of that personnel right after Wannsee to become the personnel of the Holocaust. And so it is a group of scientific and medical authorities who think they are doing the best things for the race and for Germany and for their continued survival. And nationalism's a hell of a drug.
And I saw a little bit of Ken Burns where he said that
Oh, yeah.
they looked, Ken Burns.
Yeah, I haven't watched any of it yet, so I'm excited.
I saw a little bit, but anyway, he said Hitler looked at what the United States had done with the indigenous people, and he thought that was great, you know, but he looked at us and what we were doing.
And that we continued to do.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the thing, is that we like to think that we learned from the Holocaust, or that there was a medical ethics that was brought in, but sterilizations continued on Native American reservations into the 2000s.
Well, natives are basically still in concentration camps, if you want to think about it like that. They're still on rations, they still don't have good housing, they're not able to get loans, or rarely,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, not loans that make a difference. I mean, they're put places where there are no jobs, or they're forced to stay in places where there are no jobs. I mean, there's a lot to look at there just with in our own country.
I'm so glad I brought the room down. That's my job. All right, so, I don't want to bring us down. What are our messages? Let's try and turn this round upside down. What are our messages of hope from this book? Because ultimately, this book does have, I feel uplifted as I read it. And that I feel like there is an idea of healing and change and betterment, and I'm seeing some nods. Where does that come from? Because I cannot explain where I get that, so. I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
I also don't know.
It's about survival, ultimately. That's the thing. It's about I don't want to say the triumph of the human spirit, but for all the evils that humanity produced that created the situation, that's the end of the story. Is there's life, there's a future, there's hope, and you can get through it. Not everybody get through it, but as a whole, people can get through it.
Vladek is pretty messed up, but he still lives a full life. And it's amazing that he continues to live and continues to love his son, obviously. I mean, that's the bond that is most amazing, is to see that continued love between father and son, even after, yes, the torture that their relationship is. Anybody else? Or anybody else just feel awful after they were done? That's fine too. We feel what we feel in here.
Well, the author's dad does survive the war, so that's kind of a happy ending.
Yeah.
And, I mean, his wife doesn't make it past 64, but, there's that kind of angle, he actually survives the war.
Yeah.
To America, so that's kind of happy.
And does well in America. Has a house. I mean, people would be happy with that in a lot of areas right now. You have a house, and so,
And
yeah.
the Nazis are defeated, and the Americans, defeat them and stuff. So.
Some of them we bring on board, but that's okay.
We needed them.
We needed them because of the Soviets. My gosh, awful people who smoke so much. So I mean, really, it does have that kind of a triumphalist narrative, right? That he does survive. They go on to. It seems that in some ways, Art does come to an accommodation with his father through the writing of this. That it does feel cathartic, like they have come to, even after death, he's come to some kind of better position with his father than he did with his mother. If you compare the two comics, that his father's depiction is much more measured and balanced.
Because you got that closure ultimately.
Yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah, there is a feeling of closure to it. Maybe that's manufactured too, who knows?
Well, I think that's the part of the purpose of the book too. I said earlier, I think he made that book for a number of reasons. To further comics as a form of literature, be accepted as literature, but also as a personal project of his that he'd been working on for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think, I don't think he really knew his mother as well as his father, because she was just so ill.
Yeah.
She was so ill. And in fact, in the section of the Burns documentary, Burns Novick, whatever the other person's last name is, who did this, there's a story about a son who is finally able to, or two boys who are finally able to reunite with their parents. And the mother is
Yeah.
she's not herself, and she dies not long after they reunite in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in many cases, not always of course, but in many cases, women had a much harder time with the PTSD and the depression and the mental aspect of the Holocaust.
And that is something that is coming out in research now, that we know that this is not just a trauma of one generation. It's a trauma that actually makes has adverse effects upon the genetic code, and so it is Lamarckian, and that the experience of one generation is allowed to then pass on to the next through the gene. And so we don't have many places that we can talk about that kind of, rather the Darwinian evolutionary change. But Lamarck had the idea that a giraffe reaches higher and higher for a leaf, and then that's why their neck elongates, is because they keep on, each generation, doing that rather than Darwinian, where we have modifications of the genetic code that slowly lead to evolution over time as one group is seen as fitter and is allowed to reproduce. And so it's a much quicker intergenerational change. And it's also much smaller. We only have evidence of this happening in terms of trauma and what it does to genetic markers afterward. Well, and tobacco, but that's for a different topic. We have to talk about tobacco. No. How is this compared to other, I'm sure that you've read other Holocaust works, because we all have, in some way or form, different books out there. I have not read The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I'm not going that far. But how did this go? Oh, did you? Did you read also The Mouse, or did you get a chance?
Yeah, I did.
How did it compare?
I mean, the first Boy in the Striped Pajamas was about the child, and the Mouse was about adult. They had like very different experiences.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
They're not books to compare.
I'm trying to think. What's the other one? The Book Thief. Has anybody read that one? Also from a child perspective, but again, it's from a non. In The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, it's also from a non-Jewish perspective. Correct. And so.
Well, the Diary of Anne Frank.
Diary of Anne Frank.
Who were the Dutch sisters who wrote Corrie ten Boom? Corrie ten Boom. That's an excellent book.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever read that one about their experiences? Nike.
Night.
Cynthia owes it, The Shawl.
Oh, I
It's a
haven't read
short
that
story.
one.
It's really good.
Yeah.
It's called The Shawl. Cynthia owes it. The library tries to copy, but like it's really thin. It's like 2 short stories.
Like Night. Now, again, something short. Now, see, if I'm going for depressing, I tend to go Gulag, but that's okay.
It really is.
That's fair. Other ones, the one that I used to assign before I assigned this was Christopher Browning's Ordinary Men, which is a history book, but it is about the members of the Einsatzgruppen. So they're the first, once Hitler makes the decision to, so after Operation Barbarossa and they invade the Soviet Union and they get not just part of Poland, but all of Poland, they get the area where from the 12th to the 15th century the Jewish population had concentrated. And Hitler had not anticipated this. He had anticipated the 4 million or so Jews that they had in Germany and wanting to get rid of them. What he was going to do with them is just send them off to Madagascar. And he thought that they would die out within a generation because of degeneration. That he thought that they were going to just physically not be able to reproduce and they would die out. But once they had the 11 million Jews that are largely this East European and Ukraine. So Ukraine, the word literally means kraj, it means edge. It is where we get the word pale of settlement. Ukraine is the pale of settlement. So they were pushed from Russia that way, they were pushed from Europe that way, and 11 million people. And that's when, with this extraordinary military success, Hitler abandons the idea of the Madagascar ghetto and instead goes towards the final solution. And the earliest final solution is the Einsatzgruppen, and it is basically groups of soldiers with machine guns killing off large numbers of Jewish people after clearing ghettos. Einsatzgruppen in the stories of Ordinary Men by Browning is this discussion of how do these largely older guys that were not able to go to the front lines or people that were not serving in the military, so they were not strong enough to be part of the military. How did they become part of this early final solution? And it's a fascinating book. Gruesome, but fascinating. So other books out there? Anyone want to put out some more recommendations?
The Dressmakers of Auschwitz.
The Dressmakers of Auschwitz? Anything else?
Eichmann in Jerusalem?
That's a fantastic book. Eichmann in Jerusalem. fascinating and chilling in
Yeah.
a different way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but much like Ordinary Men, it has that same work. Well, I feel we have discussed. I feel good about this. Yes.
There are some books that were written by people in Spain, too, that are really good. I can't think of that, one of the authors, I can't think of the author's name. He wrote a book that's about physics, or he is a physicist. And he relates his experience of being, he's a Spanish Jew, and he was taken into the, I think, Auschwitz.
Oh.
And he, because of his physicist training, no, I'm sorry, he was a chemist.
Oh,
And you know what I'm talking about?
criminality.
Yes.
Oh,
that's it.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing too, is that I think we often don't really think about all the different countries and where all the different people were taken from. We don't really hear about people being taken from Spain, but they were.
You don't really hear about people being taken from the Soviet Union because we did not allow the histories of that to be had until after 91. It was officially not a story. The official story was the 28 million deaths of the Soviet people, and they did not want to separate out the Jewish experience as a different experience. So, well, okay, yeah, I brought that back down again. All right, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope that you have too, because what a great crowd for such a depressing topic. Thank you for coming out. Thank you. And don't forget there's forms back there. Kelly, she'll tackle you on the way out if you don't fill out a form.
I was going to stage myself for work.